And thank you so much for joining our webinar. You know, there's an old Jewish saying, keep away from a bad neighbor. Keep away from a bad neighbor. Now, you must remember that years ago, and in some places today, people lived on top of each other. And a neighbor had absolute access to your house. He could come in at any time to your home, and if he was a bad neighbor, could be very, very destructive. He could say things behind the spouse's back. He could say things about the kids. He could say things about the parents. A bad neighbor was bad news. Today, the neighbor is not necessarily geographical. Today, the neighbor is the iPad. It's the internet. Today, particularly during COVID, kids are spending hours upon hours with their neighbor, the iPad. And we need advice. We need direction. There's nobody better to direct us and advise us than our very special guest, David Abrahamsohn. He's a very well-respected clinical psychologist. He's an expert in most fields of psychology. He deals with family issues. He's involved in the corporate world. So David, firstly, thank you for making the time on this very important subject. And we need to hear you. So thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak tonight. And yeah, as the Rabbi said, my name is David Abrahamsohn. I'm a clinical psychologist. And tonight we'll be really speaking, I think, as the Rabbi said, on something so important, which is internet safety and for our children and for our families. So let's kick straight off, and we'll be hopefully speaking for the next 35 minutes. And afterwards, please, if there's any questions, I think we'll take a couple of questions. So the first thing I'd like to say is that this parenting thing is really, really, really tough. And I always feel it's so important to start a talk about talking about how tough parenting is, because the majority of adults and parents today are completely overwhelmed and stressed. The pace of our lives is relentless, and the stresses of modern day life are huge. And in order to be a really good parent, and we talk about in psychology being a good enough parent, because there's no one's a perfect parent, but to be a good enough parent takes a lot of energy, and a lot of us parents don't have that energy. So where I'd like to start tonight is to appeal to you as parents. It's so important to prioritize some of your needs, to energize yourself to meet the needs of your children and the people around you. Now, you might have heard this before, but if you go on a flight, I thought I made this up, but then I read it in a book, so I was quite disappointed. But it's a wonderful analogy when you go on a flight and you get all these instructions at the beginning of a flight about where the emergency exits are. One of the things that you're told is always put the oxygen mask on yourself before you put it on children, before you put it on the elderly. And that is exactly what parenting is about. If you don't have the oxygen, if you don't have the energy, then there's no ways that you're going to be able to be an effective, mindful parent. So that is the first thing I'm going to say to you today. What I'm talking about today takes energy, takes mindfulness, which is really thinking about things, being purposeful. So I would say, please, make sure that no matter how small, that you are looking after yourself as a parent. So as we said, this parenting thing is tough, and I think it's getting tougher. And the question is why? And many people believe it's because of the introductions of the smartphone and social media. And that's only really happened over the last 20 years. And actually, when I was thinking about it, it has developed so quickly. Would you believe that the first iPhone was only introduced 13 years ago, and the iPad was introduced 10 years ago? And look how much has developed since then. And invariably, screen time is become an escapable reality to modern childhood. Our kids, we are as well, but our kids of most ages are on for hours on the iPad, on the smartphone, obviously watching television. So of course, one of the most highly discussed and debated topics amongst parents today is screen time. you know. And I think for me, no wonder, look at all these apps that we have to try and deal with and control and understand. WhatsApp, Facebook, I mean, it's endless. YouTube, Google, Instagram, Safari, Fortnite, of course, and the lesser known but widely used still, House Party. And I get so many questions about screen time. And there's two major questions that I hear over and over again. And the first one is, what damage can excessive or inappropriate screen time do to my child developmentally? And the other one that I hear all the time is, how much is too much screen time? And those are the two questions I'd really like to address tonight. The first thing I do want to say is that there are clearly dangers of unsupervised and unrestricted screen time. The first one we see is anxiety and depression. And why is that? Because too much information too soon for children overwhelms them. For example, I don't know if you watch, satellite TV, you watch these programs of air crashes, and every week we watch planes crashing. And when children see this, they can't understand that planes don't actually crash that often. Or we hear in the news about shootings, and children don't understand that this is actually happening far away from themselves because they don't understand proximity, that actually the news can happen far away and it doesn't affect them directly. So that definitely can cause anxiety and depression. The other things that studies are telling us is that definitely obesity and sleep disorders are on the rise. And I definitely want to spend more time in a few moments speaking about obesity and sleeping disorders. Obviously, retina damage, but that's obviously if you're watching the screens excessively. And there's a lot of contention whether it causes attention problems and hyperactivity. There's a lot of debate around that, but that's one of the things that have come up. Definitely inappropriate behavior. When children are exposed to things like pornography and violence, even in their teens, it's very, very difficult for them to really process this. And that can lead to inappropriate acting out, which can lead to serious consequences. And the other thing, obviously, is social isolation. If children are not using, and teens are not using screens to interact with other people, with other children, I think for me, they don't get enough face interaction, and they use that to escape. And as we've seen during the pandemic, which is so interesting, is a lot of teens these days have said to me, gee whiz, it's nice to see my friends on the phone, but I really, really miss the face-to-face. So those are the dangers, and we really need to look at that and understand that there are real dangers of spending excessive amounts of time on screens, and obviously exposing our children to information at a too early age. So screen time. How much is too much? And I put their screen time because every time I speak to parents, when they talk about screen time, they say it's just screen time because I'm just screaming at my children to get off. How much longer? How much longer? You need to go to sleep. You need to do your homework. So I often think about screen time when it's screen time. But to answer this question, it's a very important question. One of the leading kind of organizations in the world is the American Academy of Pediatrics. And they issued not long ago guidelines on the amount of time children and teens should spend in front of screens. And this is how it looks. Basically, from the ages of 0 to 18 months, they say there should be no screens, but only video calling if necessary, which I find quite interesting that a child of 18 months can do video calling with their parents. But really, okay, that's what they say. 18 to 24 months, they say very little digital media, and it must be done with their parents. 12 to 5 years, no more than 1 hour daily. And then very interestingly, they say from 6 to 18 years, they say this: no specific limit, as long as the digital medium does not interfere with physical activity or sleep. Which I find fascinating, that they are suggesting that from the age of 6, yes, all the way to 18, that there should be no specific time limit, as long as it does not interfere with children's physical activity or sleep. And I'm going to really explore that and in their defense, they do say that there needs to be a family plan, a contract, which I'll talk about just now, in place for children from 6 to 18 years old. And I don't necessarily agree with that completely. What is very significant is what are children actually doing as far as screen time is concerned. And a very well-known study recently has found that children who are 13 to 18-year-olds spend over 7 hours, roughly on average, a day, nearly 7.5 on screens. Children who are 8 to 12, 4 hours, 44 minutes. 6 to 8 years old, 2 hours, 56 minutes. And a lot, children who are 2 to 5 years old spend an average of 2 hours, 40 minutes a day, which is a huge amount of time. So really, I think for me, it's important to point out that the studies are saying that children are spending huge amounts of time on screens. And as the rabbi mentioned, then COVID happened, and that changed everything completely. It's crazy what's happening now because of lockdown and because of COVID, our children, and I suppose we as well, are spending so much more time in front of screens because we need to do online learning and we socialize. And I put that graphic there on purpose because so many children are actually having their parties online at the moment. But I think even before coronavirus hit, children were spending a huge amount of time on screens, and it was just skyrocketing. And as we've said before, studies have blamed problems like anxiety and depression on excessive screen use. And very importantly, and I do want to talk about it now because I think this is without doubt happening, that we have seen an increase in obesity and sleep disorders in children over the past 20 years. And I do want to spend just a moment speaking about those two aspects. I think it's so important when we talk about screens and sleep that we talk about how much sleep a child really needs, and a teenager as well. And there's no hard and fast rule, but a child aged from 6 to 12 years should really get 10 to 12 hours sleep a night, and teenagers really should get 9 to 10 hours sleep a night. And it is so important. Sleep is unbelievably important for so many reasons, not only for physical and mental well-being, which is really top of the list, but for so many aspects of you to be able to function in the world. For example, and especially for children, concentration in class. And concentration in class allows kids to then obviously develop and grow. But what we found is the amount of sleep that children are getting and the quality of their sleep is diminished. And it's a real concern, and it's really diminished greatly over the last 10 years. And the question is why? And research has told us it's about blue light. You might have heard about this, but when you're looking at your cell phone, and it emits something called blue light. And what blue light does is it actually reduces the amount of melatonin in your brain. And melatonin is the chemical we need and our children need to sleep. So the more they are on screens in the day, and certainly at night, is going to disrupt their ability to sleep. And certainly, even if they are sleeping, is going to disrupt the quality of their sleep. So it is so important, I'm going to emphasize this, that for your children, that they, at least an hour before they go to bed, that they do not watch screens. And it wouldn't be a bad idea for ourselves either, to really help us as adults. And I think it's very important also, a nice thing, a nice facility that our phones have today and iPads is actually a night mode, which I actually recommend you put on the whole day. The screen goes brown, and it actually then reduces the amount of blue light that is emitted, and therefore reduces the amount of melatonin that is reduced in your brain, so it won't disrupt sleep. So I think it's so important because sleep, as I said, is very, very important for our children. The other thing is physical activity, and I thought these numbers were fascinating, and I know there are a lot of numbers here, but I thought it was really important for me to point these numbers out because they really are dramatic. I mean, there's no doubt we know, no one has to tell us that physical health and physical activity, being busy, it doesn't have to mean that you're running a marathon or just getting out and walking, getting out into the sunlight is so important for our physical and mental health, and even more so for our children. But children's obesity has grown hugely over the last 20 years. And look at these numbers. The prevalence of overweight and obesity among children and adolescents, this is worldwide, age 5 to 19 has absolutely dramatically risen. It was 4% in 1975 and has grown to 18% in 2016. And if one, and also one would say, but hang on a second, that's only happening in high income countries. But actually that's not the case. We're seeing a rise in obesity in children in low to middle income countries. And you know, they do say particularly in urban areas. But how is this for a statistic? In Africa, the number of overweight children under 5 has increased by nearly 24% since 2000. And the question is, why is this happening? I mean, there are a number of reasons, and we can't be simplistic and just say it's because of screen time. But there is no doubt that research is saying that children are so much more sedentary. They don't go play on the playground and get active. They sit and they interact, and they don't raise their heartbeats, and they don't get out into the sun, and so absolutely burn less calories. One of the things that I do want to say, and I'm throwing this in here because it's a bugbear of mine as a psychologist, is that parents need to set the example. And I am just throwing this in out of nowhere, but I think this is a very, very important point to make, that children learn the most by watching their parents and caregivers. So it's so important that parents lead by example. So you cannot expect your child to do things, certainly as far as screen time is concerned, if you're not following them roughly as well. I mean, so you're trying to pull your screen away from your child and they are screaming and shouting. Okay, so you've got it away from them. And then what does that lead to? Then they're sitting doing nothing, and then they see you on your screens. And then what happens to them? They say, Mom and Dad, but you're on your screens. And then they go, okay, well, yeah, we understand that. So, okay, here's your screen back. So it leads to this vicious cycle where the whole family needs to be on screens and are communicating. And I can hear parents say, but I need to do work and I need to, absolutely. But I think we need to be more disciplined and set a better example for our children as far as screen and screen times are concerned. So that I just threw in there because I think it's so important. So the question is, how does one effectively parent screen time and screen content? That is the bottom line. And I think we as parents have been lost a lot in looking at time limits. Like, what is the time limit? What is the number? And that really shouldn't be the central focus because we get stuck in the number. We're trying to understand, is it 2 hours? Is it 3 hours? Is it 7 hours? I think we get lost. And I think the most important thing is that we look at something very different. And I'd like to call this the 3 C's. And we can use the 3 C's to guide us in trying to help us as far as kind of structuring screen time and screen content for our children. And what are those 3 C's? They are child, content, and context. And I'd like to just, I think, spend a little bit of time talking about this because these 3 C's, I think, are very important. And they follow in 3 steps, as they do with the 3 C's. The first one is, you know your child best. So it's important that you understand who your child is. Yes, look at their age. Yeah, look at their personality. Are they able to regulate themselves? What is their maturity level? And I think that's so important. That's the first step to take when understanding how to approach screen time, the amount of screens, and the content. So look at your child and understand your child. That is the most important start. Because a child who is 10 in one family might be very different to a child in another family. And what I mean by that is some children love sports, but other children might love spending time on screens and developing themselves and developing skills on the screen, like maybe coding, amongst other things. So know your child. The second thing is content. It is very important to point out that not all screen time is created equal. So if you think about screen time as junk food versus nourishing food, if your child is developing skills online, and is getting knowledge and is even socializing online, then that is really nourishing. But if they are doing things like which are passive and unproductive, and one of the things I always say falls into that category is watching YouTube videos online. I mean, what are you really learning and what are you achieving? I think there's a very, very big difference. Whoa, that was a lightning strike. So I think for me, how do we tell what's quality? Quality we can look at by looking at three features. One is it interactive? Is it educational? And then we've got to see, is it age appropriate? So very importantly, look at the content. And so ask yourself, is the child interacting? Is it educational? And is it age appropriate? The last thing is context. And this is very, very, very important, because this is really about how we interact with our children around media matters. I think the most important is that we engage with our children about what they are actually doing on their screens. So, and this is where it takes time and energy to actually test apps and watch videos before they do. And I think it's important to explain things like Facebook. I think we need to explain to our kids that Facebook is a puerile exercise, that when we see these smiling faces of people in exotic places, that is not a reflection of reality. So I think for me that is so important, because children and even teens don't understand that what they see on screens is often not reality. When they see celebrities and their bodies and their lifestyles, that is often not a reflection of reality and even a reflection of their lives. Also, so important to sit and engage with them and talk to them about the significance of what likes are and followers are, and how likes actually aren't that significant. That's just some stranger often just clicking a button. And what is a follower? Someone who just decides to click a button as well and say, listen, I'm going to follow you. What is the substance behind that? So really, that is so important, to talk honestly and openly about the content of what your children are doing, and obviously then about how much screen time, as we said, is healthy. So talk to them and engage with them. And I think for me, when children are younger, I think it is important. And when I say children are younger, I'd even say up to the age of 12, that you can introduce things like parental control apps. Because really, I think children at that age do need monitoring, and parent control apps work very similarly. You install, a monitoring app on the device, like your child's device, and then you manage and you restrict it from your desktop or your mobile device. And you can really change the settings at any time. And there are so many out there that are available and really good. But I think there are two ones that I would highly recommend, which is the Kaspersky Safe Kids, which is very cost effective, and it very nicely reports on Facebook, and has a very nice GPS facility if we are very anxious about our kids, because it can actually show us where our kids are and if they're leaving a certain restricted area. Bark is another one that monitors apps and social media platforms. And again, you can set limits around how and when your child uses their devices. And I think for me, it's also very important to point out that no system is perfect. So even if you do have a parental control app, it just takes one child in your child's class whose parents are not vigilant to see things which are inappropriate. So it certainly is not foolproof. So what is recommended, especially for children, again, from the young age till 11, 12, and even into teens, is to talk to them about why you are installing this monitoring software, that you're not trying to spy on them, that you are working together to make sure that dangers and concerns, inappropriate material on the internet is not going to be seen by them because of the negative effects that it might have. And if you do have a teenager who really struggles to set limits for themselves, who is irresponsible, and you do put a parental app on their phone, then it's really important to talk about their privacy concerns, because again, it's about being honest and engaging. And obviously, when you're a teenager, privacy is very, very important to you. What I would recommend, and I think is so important for every family, is to write up a family screen contract. And I think for me, what does this do? It establishes a mindful, and what I mean by mindful is that you're actually thinking it through, family culture around technology by creating this contract. And you actually sit down and you fill this in together. And each family is different, so every contract in each family will look different. It doesn't have to be the same. And then every member of the family, no matter how young, signs it, because it's a contract. And it's important to emphasize to the family that it's not a punishment, but it's just a way of setting healthy screen boundaries for everyone in the family. And remember my slide, including the parents. And what does this family contract look like? Well, really, it's about how long can they spend on screens on school nights and weekdays and holidays. When does the screen have to come off? Where does the screen charge? Very important, because often children want to keep their screens in their rooms. And a nice idea is to keep a central charging and docking station in the house away from children when it's time to sleep. Also, what is a screen time privilege? Okay, so, how can they earn more screen time? Alternatives to screen times, like what do they need to do to stay healthy, like exercise, develop other interests, which is so important. Web use and passwords. It's very important to hammer out contract around that children don't have passwords which parents don't have. Certainly children who are of a very young age, up to, I would say, even the age of 13, 14, to go through social media behavior, and what will happen when the contract is broken. So these are really the kind of things that can be looked at when you're signing a family contract. And a very, very nice place to go is a site called Common Sense Media, and it's commonsensemedia.org, which has a huge amount of information around writing up family contracts when it comes to screen time and screen content. So I think for me, in closing, and this is a huge subject, so we've had to really try and be brief and get to the point. There's so much more to talk about, but I'm going to now try in closing just really speak about the main ideas that I think are relevant and very important to screen time and screen content and your children. And the first one is, there's no doubt that technology is here to stay. So let's embrace it. Let's educate ourselves as parents. We often can feel completely overwhelmed because things are moving so quickly. But when you actually engage with it, when you take the time to actually educate yourself about things, it actually isn't so complicated. So I would say, try to engage with it. It actually isn't that overwhelming. And important to educate your child and teen about online privacy and safety. I think that is so, so important. Too many times I'm seeing in therapy children who have posted inappropriate pictures of themselves, thinking that it's that it's safe, have engaged with people online, thinking that it's a young person when it hasn't been a young person, it's been an elderly person. These things can happen, and we're not trying to scare our children. We're trying to inform them, and we're trying to give them information that is truthful. We don't want our 8-year-old to get information from another 8-year-old. We want to educate our children. We want to take control of that. So it's so important to create a culture of trust, openness, and honesty regarding screens. So don't be afraid to engage with your child when it comes to screens. As I said before, I think it's important to be very mindful in the decisions you make around screen time and content. It really must be thought through and discussed with your partner, your wife, and then to bring in the children to get their points of view. Obviously, you make the decisions in the end as the parent, but to really, I think these need to be thought through. And we think about so many other things. If we plan a holiday, where are we going to stop? Where are we going to stay? What school maybe our children should go to? Maybe if we're going to get a takeaway, there's a lot of discussions. I mean, small things. But how often do we actually sit down and consciously talk about and mindfully talk about screen time and screen content? very important to create unplugged spaces for our children. So children do need to have time to be bored, I'll call it bored, where they don't have distractions or they are not multitasking. Their brains, the other parts of their brains need to work, which is the creative side. So it's so important to talk to children about doing other things besides being online. And that can be a very important part of the family screen contract. And very similarly, to encourage your child to learn and to engage in other activities like sports and music, arts and hobbies that don't involve screens. And I think, again, that very much can be part of the family screen contract, that in order to be online, you really need to do other things to develop yourself as a holistic human being. As I started this presentation, I want to end with it. And I know it might sound irrelevant, but it's so important not to forget that to be a mindful, engaging parent takes so much energy. So make sure you do things for yourself as a parent that keeps you energized and positive, because we've spoken about being very engaged with our children when it comes to parenting, and especially when it comes to this issue around screen time and screen contact. So if you don't have the energy to engage with your children, then you're not going to be able to do this effectively. So put the oxygen mask on yourself and make sure that you as a parent are giving yourself enough energy to parent effectively. So thank you so much for listening. I know, that it was only a 30-minute talk. We needed to get a lot of information into a small amount of time, but hopefully I've succeeded in giving you some ideas on how to manage screens, the content, and clearly then trying to understand your child and screen time not being, as I said, the focus completely of managing your child's interaction with screens. Let's rather look at the 3 C's as I've described. Great, thank you so much. And if there's any questions.
There was a very fast half an hour, I might tell you. If there are any questions, please post them. I have 1 or 2 questions for you.
Yes,
Firstly,
with pleasure.
Do you want to take off your screen sharing here so we can see you? Okay.
Absolutely. Let me get rid of that. Let me do this. Let's go back here. There, can you see me now?
No, still your screen in closing. Okay, beautiful, thank you.
Sure.
So first of all, I want to ask you as follows. Would you know how much time the average adult, teenager and child, are there studies of it, actually spend on screens today? Is there answers to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just going to quickly go back to my...
I'm talking about the northern suburbs of Johannesburg.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to just quickly refer back to my notes, because this study was done recently and actually pointed to, actually looked at that. And it was done in America, but this is very much, they felt representative of, if you're talking northern suburbs, first world first world interactions of screens. And they said 13 to 18-year-olds spend 7 hours a day, roughly. Wow. 7 hours a day. Obviously, they looked at the weekend as well, and they then included time spent on screens on the weekend, and then divided it by 7. And it was 7 hours a day. And that's on average. So some kids are spending a little bit less, but there are some that are spending a little bit more.
That
and I need to say, that includes school hours. That includes school hours, but it doesn't include online schooling.
What?
So that's just
7 hours a day besides for your online. Isn't that mad?
It is a huge amount of time, And I'm going to, and I know, Rabbi, I've spent a bit of time tonight talking to parents and saying to parents, you've got to set the example. Please set the example. And I'm going to challenge parents to, and often, with most of our smartphones today, you can monitor how much time you spend online. And I think you'll be shocked how much time we as adults spend online. it's a frightening amount of time, and it might not seem like that we're just logging on here and logging on there, checking the news, checking the weather, going onto Facebook, Googling here and there. It accumulates and to hours and hours and hours. And I'm going to, and well, certainly from the reading that I've done, that parents are not far behind that 7 hour average a day.
Sure, that's mind-blowing. I mean, I want to ask you as follows. Would you have the answer to this? How much time does the average South African northern suburbs parent spend with their kids? Now, I'm not saying in the car where I'm on the phone and the kid's on the car.
Right.
Is there answers to how much proper time where a kid says, hello, Johnny, I know you?
Right.
How much time is
Rabbi, and that's why I often talk about a crisis in parenting, because there's two types of situations I find is that some parents, need to work. Maybe if there's two parents, both parents need to work, and parents are not available because they are physically working. And when they come home, they're exhausted. They don't have the energy, as I said, to actually interact with their children in a meaningful way. And then we have parents who are lucky enough not to work. So maybe, I don't mean to generalize, but then you have maybe a father or mother who works, and another parent who doesn't. But that parent who doesn't work often is overscheduling their child. And again, I also, quite controversially, I'm going to blame the education system, where we haven't got time to engage with our children properly. We are running around from activity to activity, and we are trying to keep up with projects and homework. So the time to actually engage with our children and actually take the energy to actually look at what they are doing and talk to them about these things, like what they're doing on screens, it really, really happens. And that's why I think for me, we should emphasize home time. We should emphasize home time being downtime, and not running around to a million activities. And very importantly, dinner time. That's why it's so important that screens are off and that you're sitting at dinner time and engaging with your child, because often that is the golden, they talk about the golden hour when it comes to the medical side of things. You need to get to medical help within an hour. That is the golden hour for psychological well-being, because we are so busy, whether we're working or we're not, whether we're with our children or we are not. That is the time that we can engage with them. So the long answer to your short question, Rabbi, is unfortunately very little. And I think we need to be mindful of that and create the time, and give yourself the energy, as I said, so look after yourself a bit in order to create that time and energy so that you can engage with your children in a very productive and very thoughtful way, and especially around screens.
During COVID, now let's just speak about husband and wives. During COVID, when people locked up, do people spend more time with each other, or do people just get more engaged on screens?
It's such an interesting question, and I think for me it's still early days. There's so many studies that I think are being done at the moment that I think we'll all be very interested to see about this period around COVID. But I think for me, it's been a very stressful time for so many people, whether it's been, financially, worrying about health. It really kind of being at home and isolated, not being able to engage with people, actually physically be with people. It's been unbelievably stressful. So I think for me, a lot of marriages I've found have been, are in trouble. But I need to say that those marriages were shaky in the beginning, but they, parents in those marriages had space. They could move away from each other and spend a lot of time away from each other. And COVID stopped that. But what I would say is that there's also been a lot of positives around COVID, is that we have stopped running. And I think for me, a lot of parents and a lot of children have really appreciated the time, the actual physical time. Even if people are working at home, parents are working at home and children are online, they've been so much more present and been able to engage with their children, had so many more opportunities to engage with their children. So although there has been a lot of stress and a lot of strain around COVID, one of the positives around it has been that people have been forced actually to stop running and engage with the people around them. And that has really, really been positive.
So just hearing, you would probably say when things get back to normal, it would probably, and I say this, I ask this with caution, it would probably be advisable for for people to spend a little bit more time at home than running to the office every day for 10 hours a day.
There's no question about it. I think for me, we should really stop and try and understand and learn from this experience. And, people talk about, going back to creating a new normal. I don't really like that idea of a new normal because, what is normal anymore? But I do think for me, there are lessons to be learned from this pandemic, and some hard lessons. But I think very importantly, one of the things is to stop running. Where possible, to really be more mindful of being just like headless chickens. We just run and run and run. And it's exhausting. And sometimes we would not feel in control of it. As I said, you've got work pressures, you've got maybe if you're a stay-at-home mom or dad, you've got homework to do and projects to help out on. And that we are under a lot of stress. But I think for me, one of the most valuable things about this COVID experience is not to try and actually not go back to the regular, because a lot of the regular is very, very negative as far as how we live. So yeah, I think it's a great opportunity now over this December break to actually sit back, maybe before we get a vaccine, and decide what you actually want to retain from this period, what was valuable, and what actually you want to go back to. So I think it's absolutely a fantastic question, Rabbi, that we need to, I think what's important to really think about what we can learn from this COVID experience. And certainly online, I think for me, we've seen the power of interaction online, especially for children. And then that's why I'm saying, be very careful when you take your child off Fortnite, for example, because you'll see that they're actually interacting with their friends and that children are actually socializing that way. Certainly they can't be on for hours and hours and hours endlessly, but that's actually not completely unproductive time. They're socializing. Very interesting, Rabbi, what I've also found is that children have often said to me, it's been so nice to see my friends face to face. It's one thing seeing them online, but I really love seeing them. So that's also proof to us another thing, that children, no matter how much they like being online, they've realized through this COVID experience how important face-to-face interaction is. I've never heard so many children say, I wish I could go back to school.
Amazing. You spoke about a family contract and where you could find it online. First of all, it's the first time I've heard of a family contract. And I'm not sure how many people actually have family contracts or how easy it is to install. But really what I've taken from this evening is that you just need to have a proper balance and proper discipline and spend proper time with your kids. And it's the effort. And each parent.
Spot on, Rabbi. I think for me, that's the thing, is that we're so obsessed about, and I now understand that as parents, we want to have guidelines. We want to have structure. How much time, what content, and unfortunately, it's not as simple as that when it comes to screens. The family contract is fantastic, and you can, as I said, you can go into commonsensemedia.org. They've got a structure that you can follow, but please, you need to adapt it to your family according to your children, your family's needs, and the values. That you want for your children. So it really needs to be nipped and tucked. But I think for me, this is really what I'm saying tonight, is that, when we talk about the 3 C's, we're really not saying just follow these 3 C's and it's a one size fits all. It's really about being conscious, like I say, of knowing your child, understanding who your child is. Because if we don't, then we can't determine how much more time really they should be spending on screens. Because if your child loves coding, then clearly they need to be on screens more. If your child, kind of enjoys exploring different types of genres of music, that's going to entail them being more on screens. So if you're going to say, well, sorry, after 3 hours, that's it. So we need to be flexible and understand our children. If we had a child who wants to just sit and play Fortnite all day, or wants to just watch YouTube videos all day, then again, that tells us a lot about our child. And maybe then we need to put in more restrictions. And then very clearly, as you're saying, Rabbi, it takes work. And unfortunately, we can't escape that. It takes engaging with your child. It takes, one of the things that I've really tried to do is follow my own advice, which I don't always do. But one of the things I do is I spend a lot of time on the screen, especially my 11-year-old boy. I watch and I learn about Fortnite and I learn about TikTok. And I kind of want to understand these things and how they work, because the more I understand them, the more I can understand my child and their difficulties getting off screens and their difficulties, kind of, because I think for me, what's also so important is that we're actually in a battle. Companies, these technology companies want us to be online as much as possible because that creates revenue. And so they want our children to be online. And I think for me, it's so important, again, to have these conversations about this very thing to our children. Explain to them about serotonin levels, that every time you get a message, your serotonin levels go up. And that's exactly what the technology companies want us to do, is to get addicted to that feeling. So it really is about engaging with your children and educating your children. And as I said earlier, we want to educate our children. We want to be in control of that. We want to be able to give them that information rather than another 10-year-old or even an 11-year-old or even 13-year-old. We want to be giving them the correct information. They want to say, listen, hang on a sec, my dad, my mom, they told me about this and you're wrong. I know the right information.
We're running out of time, but just to point out that everybody looks at the restrictions of Shabbos. You can't do this, you can't do that. The truth of the matter is Shabbos gives 24 hours of absolute family time with a family contract where you have to interact. You come home, you have to sing a song to your wife. You have to praise everybody. It's we realize the cleverness of our religion. And I just want to say,
Absolutely. I mean, I can talk about this for a very long time when it comes to to certain religions, and certainly Judaism. When it comes to Shabbos, keeping the Shabbat, you're forced to put your phone down. You're forced to interact with the person face to face. It's unbelievably powerful. And there's so many other things about Judaism which are very, very productive as far as parenting is concerned. But there is no question that Shabbat and Yom Tovim are very, very, very instrumental in keeping the family together, in being connected, not only spiritually, but clearly connected with the people around you. So it's unbelievably powerful. And I think it's so interesting because we read the latest research, and the latest research is, over the last 5-10 years, he's saying, oh no, we need to take time out and we need to put our screens down and spend time with our kids and really engage with with our spouses and our friends. And it's interesting because Judaism has been saying that for centuries. So I think for me, the research is a little bit behind the curve.
Well, a good time to start this week is Shabbos Project. It's a good time for people to get involved. I just want to conclude by saying that what you taught me tonight is that without realizing it, I'm spending about 42 hours a week on my online, but this has probably been the best hour that I've had in a long time. And I want to thank you for making the time and for sharing with us your wisdom and opening our eyes and making us think. It's been invaluable. Thank you very much for making your time.
It's only a pleasure, Abba. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Be well, and thank you all for joining. And we will see you all. David, we've got to have you back. Got to teach us some more.
Oh, with only a pleasure. Whenever, Abba, I can never say no to you.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye-bye.